Most legendary weed names are strains, like OG Kush, Sour Diesel, and Runts. You know what I mean? It's usually one specific plant that somebody bred. But there's an exception here, because one of the most famous weed names in North American history isn't a strain at all. It's a place. And for decades, the letters B and C, standing for British Columbia, meant you were holding some of the best weed on the continent. And behind that little stamp was a multi-billion-dollar underground empire that was a straight pipeline into the United States. This is the story of BC Bud. The first thing to understand is that BC Bud isn't one specific strain. It's a reputation tied to a place. Think of it the same way people talk about French wine or Italian leather. It just means high-quality cannabis grown in British Columbia. And funny enough, the name itself is older than the weed, because there was actually a BC Bud beer brewed back in the Prohibition days. But the name really got known in cannabis, and by the 1990s and 2000s, BC Bud meant some of the best weed on earth. To understand how a cold, wet province in Western Canada became a weed-growing legend, you first have to go back to the Vietnam War. Because during that war, tens of thousands of young Americans who didn't want to fight crossed the border to escape into Canada. And Canada let them in, treating them as immigrants instead of criminals. And a big chunk of them ended up settling in British Columbia. And those newcomers are the whole reason BC became a cannabis capital. Most of them were young, educated hippies chasing the back-to-the-land dream, wanting to live off the grid deep in the wilderness. And the big thing is, a lot of them brought weed seeds and real growing knowledge with them, much of it from California. So the remote parts of British Columbia suddenly had a wave of people who knew exactly how to grow weed, all looking to build a new life out there. And that's what started the whole BC Bud story. But skilled growers were only half of it, because they also needed the perfect place to do it. And British Columbia turned out to be exactly that. Places like the Kootenays, Vancouver Island, and the Gulf Islands had a few things going for them. They had cheap land, often in old logging or mining towns that had fallen on hard times. They had mild, ocean-influenced weather. And most importantly, they had endless remote wilderness where you could hide a grow deep in the woods, far from any police. So growers started planting these hidden gardens all over the backcountry. For a while, through the 70s and 80s, those hidden gardens were mostly outdoors, tucked away on remote hillsides. But then, the whole thing moved indoors. And that's where BC really perfected its craft. Growers started building indoor operations, called grow-ops, using hydroponics and artificial lights. And going indoors was genius for a few reasons. You could grow all year round, no matter the weather. You could carefully control everything to make the plants stronger, and it was way easier to hide. And there was a secret weapon that made indoor growing explode in BC. Cheap electricity. Because British Columbia runs on hydroelectric power from all its dams, the province has some of the cheapest power in North America. And indoor growing with all those lights eats up a ton of electricity. So BC growers had access to cheap power to run their operations, and many went even further and simply stole the electricity off the grid to hide their tracks. That power theft got so bad, it was reportedly costing the power company around $100 million a year. Between the cheap power, the perfect land, and the expert growers, all of this snowballed into an absolutely massive underground industry. We're talking one of the biggest cash crops in the entire province. Now I have to be honest about the numbers here, because it was an illegal, hidden industry, so nobody knows the exact figures. But the most commonly cited estimates valued BC's marijuana business at somewhere around $6 billion a year at its peak, with some estimates ranging lower. Some estimates said it employed up to 150,000 people in some way. Whatever the true number was, it was gigantic. And in some rural towns, weed quietly became the thing holding the whole local economy together. But all that weed had to go somewhere, and most of it went to one place: south into the United States. Because that's where the real money was, and it all came down to something simple: a price gap. Think about it like this. A pound of BC bud might go for around $2,000 inside Canada. But if that pound is across the border into an American city, it could go for $6,000, $7,000, even $8,000. Border officials at the time said BC bud was going for as much as a different thing. That gets people energized goes for "if you get my drift." So that massive price jump created an irresistible incentive to get it across that border by any means necessary. And with that being said, a whole smuggling pipeline was born, and the methods got more and more extreme over time. It started small, with backpackers literally hiking loads of weed through the dense forests on foot across the border. But as the money grew, so did the ambition. People used trucks with secret hidden compartments. They used boats. And most dramatically of all, they started using helicopters, flying loads deep into remote American forests, landing in a clearing, dropping off the weed, and often flying something else back north. Now I need to be careful and honest about that something else, because this is where the story gets dark. As the profits exploded, this stopped being a gentle hippie operation and started attracting serious organized crime. Groups like the Hells Angels biker gang and other criminal organizations moved in and took over big parts of the export trade. The general pattern was weed going south into America, and that energizing stuff and cash coming back north into Canada. And this led to some huge criminal cases too, with major smugglers eventually getting caught and sentenced to serious time in American prisons. And I do want to be fair here, because a popular version of this story is that they traded BC bud pound for pound straight up for energizers. But the Canadian police actually cast doubt on that specific romantic image. The reality was more of a straightforward money business than a clean weed for something else swap. But the bigger point stands. What started as counterculture hippies growing in the woods had turned into a hardcore, violent, international smuggling business. Now, while all this money was flying across the border, one man back home became the public face of BC's entire weed world. His name was Marc Emery, and he was known as the Prince of Pot. Emery set up shop in Vancouver and started openly selling cannabis seeds, building what became one of the biggest seed operations in the world. And he wasn't quiet about it. He poured his seed money into cannabis activism, funding legalization efforts all over the place, and even started a weed magazine and a political party. Emery was loud, public, and basically dared the authorities to come after him. And eventually, they did. But it wasn't Canada that took him down. It was the United States. Because his seeds were being sold to American growers, the US government went after him, and in 2005, he was arrested at their request. He was eventually extradited to the United States and served time in an American prison, becoming a martyr for the legalization movement in the process. For years, BC bud sat on top of the weed world. But then a few things happened that brought the golden age to an end. And the biggest one, ironically, was legalization. Because as American states like Washington, Oregon, and California started legalizing weed, they began growing tons of high-quality cannabis of their own, legally. And suddenly, that huge price gap that made smuggling BC bud so profitable just collapsed. Why risk smuggling Canadian weed across a border when you could buy great legal weed grown right at home? Then, in 2018, Canada itself fully legalized marijuana. And you'd think that would have been a giant victory for all those legendary BC growers who'd been perfecting their craft for decades. But there's a sad twist. For a lot of them, it wasn't. The new legal system was built with tons of rules, red tape, and expensive licensing that favored big corporations with deep pockets. So many of the small, legendary craft growers who built the entire BC bud reputation found themselves shut out, unable to afford the transition into the legal world they'd basically created. And I do want to add a small detail here. I'm pretty sure the movie Kid Cannabis is about BC bud. It's a great watch if you're interested in seeing the ways it got to America, but besides that, it leaves us with the million-dollar question. Where does BC bud stand today? And honestly, its legendary reputation still carries real weight. BC grown weed is still seen as a premium product, and there's now a whole craft cannabis movement of small BC growers trying to carry that legacy forward, legally this time, focusing on small batch, high-quality flower. The wild, lawless, multi-billion-dollar smuggling empire is largely gone, replaced by a legal industry and a group of veteran growers fighting to keep the craft alive. So, at the end of the day, BC Bud is one of the great stories in cannabis history. It's the tale of how a group of counterculture dreamers hiding out in the Canadian wilderness accidentally built the most famous weed reputation in North America. They turned cheap land and cheap power into an underground empire worth billions. They flooded the entire West Coast with legendary weed, and they created a name that still means quality to this day. It's proof that sometimes the most powerful brand isn't a company at all. It's just a place, and the people crazy enough to bet everything on it.